I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 283 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today we're talking about rest, specifically building tolerance for what I call the undone so that you can rest. So I know that many of us are working all the time. And maybe not in the classical sense of work, like getting up and commuting to an office and working late hours, sort of burning the midnight oil. There are those of you out there doing that, I'm sure. But I think that many of us are using most of, if not all, of our waking hours to do something that feels like work, right? Whether it is related to our professional lives in home offices or coffee shops or calls that we're taking from the car or time in the office, but also the work that we're doing for our home lives, right? I just spent time this morning talking with someone who's doing some restoration work in our basement after we had a little flooding. That's work. That's time that I'm spending to do things related to managing my household, scheduling people to come and clean the windows, managing having hardwood floors refinish, like all of those kinds of activities, whether we're doing them ourselves or scheduling people to do them, that's work. And then also our roles as caregivers, the work that we're doing as parents, the work that we're doing as pet parents, the work that we're doing with our aging parents, all of the caregiving that we do in our lives is work, right? It's us pouring out our effort in service to something that needs to be done. And we are taught this. It is modeled for us. It is celebrated. It is venerated, right? This is our culture, is that work is what we prize, being productive, getting things done. And what we aren't taught is how to find or savor the peace that comes when we've learned how to rest and to recharge and to have lives that are about more than work. It's really, frankly, disheartening. And I am like public offender number one, right? When it comes to this, this is something that has been, and it continues to be a journey for me. I am very much by personality, someone who tends toward productivity and work and getting things done. If you don't believe me, just ask my husband. He would be more than happy to tell you about just how much my life is oriented in that direction. And so it really has taken some effort, some intentionality to redefine my definition of, what are the elements of a day lived well. And I think I've made a lot of progress on this, and I want to share some of the things I've done that have been helpful, because my bent is always to sort of pause and double click on, why is it this way, right? Why do I seem to wake up thinking about what I am going to get done versus what I would enjoy doing, for example, right? What's underneath that? And I have this, it's almost an obsession with double clicking on that and sort of poking around at the underpinnings of those habits to see why they're happening. And I think it's a learned behavior. In my case, I think it was modeled for me. But I also think that I did a little bit of a look back at ancient history, this is a pretty new phenomenon. So we could argue this is the culture, at least in America where I live. But for most of human history, rest, or the time in which we can recharge, our mental and physical batteries that we were using while laboring, that ability, that time was really prized as a gift. And some of it has always been passive. Sleep, for sure. Napping, sort of sitting in a chair and having, that what we sort of traditionally think of as rest is this kind of down energy, passive resting. But a really big part of rest historically was active, right? What we might today think of as leisure. In ancient Rome, they had this term called, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, I think, but odium. It's Otium. That was the name for this sort of third category, right? It was time that was free from activity. There was a sense of leisure or free time associated with that particular time in the day. And it was intentionally. People intentionally found pastimes, we might call them hobbies, that they could engage in during what was kind of a prescribed period of time. It was a sort of a third part in the day. So if I think about this in our modern culture, we would have work and we would have sleep or rest, and we might think of this as play or leisure, right? Aristotle, I went all the way back to Aristotle, he called this noble leisure. And noble leisure was his word for the types of activities that we find stimulating and joyful, but they are choices. Like, they're not things that we have to do. They're things we choose to do, things we get to do, things we want to do, right? And this is kind of the path out of an episode or so ago. I talked about the midlife blahs and how when we get to the stage of midlife, we're kind of like, meh. Adam Grant famously coined the term languishing to describe that, where we're kind of like, we're bored, right? And I think that part of this languishing is a response to this on-off switch, where we're either working like pedal to the metal, or we think we're supposed to be just doing nothing. And really, this middle ground, which Aristotle called noble leisure, is this concept of all of the activities that fill you with a sense of meaning, right? Where we're doing, you could even think of service as fitting into this category, where we're doing it because we want to, we're doing it because it has intrinsic reward, right? It brings us pleasure. When we're doing these things, it moves us toward that sense of flourishing, where we're creating and connecting and contributing. And that is this category that we don't really make any time for, right? Many of us hardly even think of rest as its own thing. We're just like, I'm either working or I suck, right? I'm working or I'm doing nothing. I'm a loser. It's like this negative space that gets defined by the absence of work. So we fill all of our time with work because that's what's rewarded. That's what people, praise us for. That's what people say, wow, look at how much she gets done. I don't know how she gets it all done. How does she do it? So we're filling our day, cramming all these little bits of productivity into the nooks and crannies of our day. And then what happens is we hit a wall and we do things like scroll on our phones, right? We're just kind of vegging out, or we're numbing out in other ways that are really not very sticky or magnetic, right? Or attractive. Very few of us, I think, are like, you know what I would like to do? I would just like to scroll on my phone and see what people have put out there for me to just be attracted to. Like, it's not an intentional activity. It's one that we kind of fall into out of exhaustion. And it's just stimulating enough to keep us from having to find another creative way to fill that time. And it's also just stimulating enough to prevent us from having true rest. So that, think about that kind of period in your evening where you're tired and you're like, I don't really want to go to bed, but you know that if you turned off all the lights and kind of got the conditions right, you'd probably just fall asleep. But instead, it can be hours of just clicking through the channels to see what you can find on Netflix or Hulu or Apple Plus or whatever, right? Or scrolling on our device. So it's like we keep working, or we fall into one of these sort of numbing rituals, right? And we're avoiding true rest, sleep, and we don't actually have the kind of energy that we need or the intentionality that we need for this idea of like noble leisure, where it's a choice. So we keep working. And I think that when I double clicked on this in my own life to see like what's underneath this, the thing that seems to be in our way, one of the things, there's probably several, but one of the things that I think is in our way is our tolerance level for what I refer to as the undone, right? This is the mountain of tasks that live on our to-do list, right? Whether one that we've written down or kind of like mentally in our head, and it's kind of following us around. It's like stalking us with things we should be doing. And it is the barrier to this kind of leisure and downtime, because in the back of our mind is all the stuff we could be doing, should be doing, or supposed to be doing, right? The undone. And I think that the way that we think about the undone, the way we dance with it, the way we conceptualize it, and our tolerance for it is really the key to our ability to get more true rest, like passive rest, and more of this noble leisure. Because we're going to have to be willing to set aside this, maybe tiny molehill or big mountain of undone things if we're going to turn our attention to these other pursuits. And that is a skill that a lot of us just don't have, right? It's really hard to give ourselves permission. I have more conversations with women who are like, I cannot sit down and watch a movie. I can't watch a TV show. I can't sit and have a conversation or a cup of coffee without, it's not that they're not ever doing it, but without this constant sort of ticker tape running through my head of the things I could be doing, should be doing, am supposed to be doing, right? And that brings with it feelings of guilt or inadequacy. And then what do? We get up and start doing those things, or we try to multitask. So I'm going to share, if you are like head nodding vigorously as you're listening to me say this, 4 ideas for you today that I have used to try to learn to build tolerance for, to manage what I'm calling the undone, that I want to share with you. And maybe one or more of them will be helpful. I sure hope so. And if you have other ideas, I would love to hear about them. You can just hit me up on Instagram with the DM. I'm at cskolnicki. How do you do this? Right? What do you do to help yourself tolerate the undone so that you can have some of this noble leisure time or true rest? Hi, it's Cheryl Ann. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. All right, first thing I do, I trained myself to write it all down. So this is candidly overwhelming at first if you are accustomed to carrying your, what I call the running to-do list around in your head. This is going to feel like you are about to organize your clothes, like your wardrobe, and you've opened all of your drawers and taken everything out, and it's kind of all over the room and it's a giant mess. That's what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like, oh my God, I didn't even know there was this much lurking in here, and now I'm pretty overwhelmed. But it is the critical first step to getting organized and kind of wrapping your head around how much stuff are we really talking about here? Because I will tell you this, it is a lot heavier when it is in your head than it is when you can see it on paper or on a digital screen, like whatever works for you. So I'm saying write it all down. I do mean that literally. I tend to do this in longhand first, like I write it out with a pencil on a notebook. But you absolutely could do this in a digital format. Mine eventually gets transferred to a digital tool. But I think getting it out of your head at the time that you're starting to feel overwhelmed. So if that's bedtime for you and that's when all of those thoughts start to surface, maybe this is the little journal or notebook or yellow pad that you keep on the nightstand so that you can just purge all of this from your mind and give it a place to land. And that's really how I think about it. I think about this as giving all of these to-do list items a place to land so that you get the headspace back, right? So that it's freed up from being carried around in your mind. And also so that you can start to organize it, right? So that you can start to group these tasks. And we're going to talk in a minute about scheduling. It's much easier to do that if you're dealing with a list you can see than if you're dealing with a big kind of buzzy cloud of stuff in your head. So writing it all down is one thing that's been super helpful. Second thing is when I think about my day, I am using time limits on tasks. So think about the alternative. The alternative is to say, I'm going to do this project, right? Like let's use a podcast. I'm going to write the notes for a podcast. Now, that goes on my to-do list. Trust me, it goes on my calendar to say I'm going to do that. But I also give myself an amount of time, because sometimes the thing I've scoped to do, like my eyes are bigger than my stomach, right? And maybe you've had this experience where you're like, oh, I say I'm going to do this thing, and then I get into it, and it's going to take longer than I thought. So if you have set the expectation that you're going to get all this done, then how are you going to know when you're allowed to stop? Right? This is how we get into the habit of picking it all back up again in the evening and working late into the night, right? Or trying to cram the things into day parts. So thinking about my day in terms of time, it's kind of a variant on time boxing, right? If you're familiar with that concept, setting time limits for these tasks instead of saying, I'll do it until it's finished, does a couple of things. One, psychologically, it gives it a container. And these containers are very helpful because you're sort of steering toward a finish line. If I say I'm going to give myself, 45 minutes to write the notes for an episode, then I'm going to give myself 45 minutes. If I just say write the notes for the episode, I could be researching down rabbit holes for hours, right? I can be perfectionistically fixing little details. But if I say you got 45 minutes to do this and it's kind of bookended with other tasks that are on my list, I'm going to get it done. So setting time limits is one way to help you manage the undone, because this is as far as I'm going to get, right? So this also means that you can schedule this noble leisure or playtime, right? Because being able to do really great work requires having these great escapes from work, right? You kind of like equal and opposite. If you're going to do intense work, you kind of want intense play. I found this great Winston Churchill quote when I was prepping for this episode, and he said, "It's not enough merely to switch off the lights, which play upon the main and ordinary field of interest. A new field of interest must be illuminated." Okay, it's kind of older language, so I'm going to say it again. It's not enough merely to switch off the lights, which play upon the main and ordinary field of interest. In other words, you can't just be like, well, I'm done with work, I'm going to just shut it down for the day, right? Turn off my computer, turn off the lights. A new field of interest must be illuminated. In other words, I have to have something as exciting to go do. It has to be as mentally absorbing. It has to have some of the same psychological rewards as my work does, but in a really different context, right? Where I'm not trying to solve the same problems. So this is a cautionary message against multitasking, right? And also against kind of just good enough leisure. Like I'm going to use the phone scroll again, right? We're looking for something that captures our imagination, that's like enticing and exciting. Because I want you to think about your own behavior. When you have one of those things on your calendar for the day, is it easier to shut down the work, right? Let's say you've come to love pickleball and you have a pickleball match on your, I'm saying match, you can tell I don't play pickleball, game. You have that on your calendar, then maybe that's enough that it's exciting for you to go get it. Maybe you have tickets to a play and you're like, I can't wait to go see this play. And I know I'm going to shut down so that I can go and see this play. Maybe you love to get outside and walk, and you have a walk with a friend scheduled that is an engaging conversation that's waiting for you, right? That's like delicious. You can't wait to shut down so that you can go do that thing. But if it's just like, well, I'm going to put this big block of nothing in my calendar, and you know that your history is, I'm going to end up kind of slumped over in a chair, scrolling on my phone, who wants to do that? Right? No one chooses that. And so it doesn't have enough like magnetism to pull us toward it. So in a given day, while you're scheduling some time limits around your work, we also want to layer in these periods of play or leisure, because that schedule in a day is what gives us kind of the dot to dot, right? We're moving, ideally alternating between work and something that's engaging, but that's leisure, more work, more leisure. And I'll tell you, the research on this is pretty interesting. Some of the highest performers in business, in science, in entertainment are people who have really intense really engaging passions and hobbies that they go and pursue, right? There is things like skiing and sailing and mountain climbing. Like they're really engaging things that they put a lot of time and effort into. And so it's interesting, right? That notion of equal and opposite, big work, big play. All right. Third thing that I do to try to deal with this mountain of undone is I've learned to schedule tasks for future dates. So after I've done that exercise of writing everything down, it's certainly not possible to do it all right away, but you can feel a little bit of urgency sometimes once you've seen it written down, like I should just do this. And so when you start to use this scheduling structure of, okay, I'm going to go through my day and I'm going to schedule time limits around these tasks, you kind of start to be able to visualize how much time you really have. And that gives you the permission to schedule some things for future dates. Okay. When you can see that you're going to run out of time, when you've come face to face with that reality, you get the permission to schedule some tasks for future dates. And when you're scheduling things in the future, your brain kind of goes, oh, check mark, right? I've done what I need to do right now, which is I found a place for that. And then I'm just going to go live my life, right? With that task not yet being done. And when I get to that date in the future, I'm going to do it. So there's a bit of mental freedom that has allowed me to tolerate the task not yet being done because I know when I'm going to do it, right? That active scheduling is like, oh, there's a little relief because I know when it's going to happen. Okay. So scheduling things out for future dates is the third idea. And the fourth one, honestly, might be the hardest. This is probably the one I'm still working on personally, is I am come to accept that there will always be more to do, right? That feeling that we're chasing of being caught up or finished or like, okay, I can rest and relax now because everything is done. That feeling is probably never coming, right? In totality. It comes in when you use these other tools, it comes in smaller doses. It's like mini finish lines. Okay, I've gotten done what I scoped for today. So I feel good about that. I get that little hit of relief of being caught up on what I planned to do. But life will continue to present us with things to do. It's kind of like, I picture it like an escalator where every step is holding tasks and the steps just keep coming toward us, right? We just pick up the ones on the step right in front of us, do them. And then, man, the next day, that next step is coming. And so, but we just need to take it one step at a time. So if we want to have a life, like a real life and not just a checked off to-do list, we're going to have to pace ourselves. And this idea of taking things one day at a time and honoring like our human limits, our needs for sleep, our needs for play, our needs for rest, acknowledging that need and desire to recharge, to have some leisure, this is the key. And it allows us to say, I get it, mountain of undone stuff that is trying to bring me down, right? I see you over there, but I have a plan for you. First of all, I've written you down, right? I know what these tasks are. I've got some scoped for this day, so I'm not just doing nothing. I can kind of get that hit of productivity. I'm being honest with myself about what's reasonable in the day, and I'm intentionally putting time in for leisure. I'm leveraging this massive online calendar I've got to be able to schedule future tasks for future dates, which gives me some mental freedom. And I'm going to just sit in acceptance that there will always be more to do. That's kind of the beauty of life, is we're ready for more. When we've had the recovery time, when we've had some time away in leisure, we come back ready to do more, right? So when we're really like, oh my God, I can't tolerate this undone, it's often a signal that we're kind of teetering toward burnout. We haven't learned the recovery mechanisms that give us the renewed energy that we need to tackle that list. So these 4 ideas that I'm sharing with you today, these are hard-earned, like personal lessons. I hope that one or more of them will be super helpful to you. And if you do have another idea, if you're like, this is what I do to tolerate the undone so that I can get out there and have a life that I love, hit me up with that DM on Instagram. Again, it's at @cschoolnikki. That's my account. Would love to hear your ideas. I'll repost them if we get some good ones. And I also would love it if you would share this episode with someone who needs it, right? You know who that person is. There's someone in your life where you're like, this is my friend, my sister, my colleague, my daughter, who is just buried under a mountain of things to do and doesn't feel like they can handle it. And I want you to share these ideas and see if you can help alleviate a little bit of that suffering, right? Provide a little bit of relief. That is my greatest gift that you can give me, is sharing my words, my work with people who can benefit. That is all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.